pregnant wife walked in on the millionaire and his mistress. She didn't say a word. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and in the soft brightness of a sunlit living room, lined with gold-trimmed furniture, a moment unfolded that no one in that house would ever forget. Charlotte Hargrove, carrying her first child, stepped into her husband's extravagant coastal estate in Newport and uncovered a betrayal so deep it could have dismantled everything she believed about her world. She had only wanted reassurance, a loving embrace from the man she trusted above all. Instead, she found him in the arms of another woman. The sight shattered the fragile comfort Charlotte had carefully built around her. But there were no tears, no shouts. Charlotte didn't say a word. She simply stood there, letting the silence wrap around her. Charlotte Hargrove had grown up in a modest neighborhood just outside of Portland, Maine. Long before she ever met Anderson, she knew what it meant to stretch a dollar, to hear her parents whispering late at night, worrying over bills they couldn't pay. Survival had shaped her early years. Even so, Charlotte never lost her brightness. She used to paint ocean sunsets and sketch wildflowers in the corners of her worn-out school notebooks. She wrote short stories about courage, about second chances, and love that defied the odds. When she met Anderson Hargrove at a charity fundraiser, a night she only attended because her friend Laurel Benton begged her, she had to borrow a dress. Laurel came from a well-to-do family in Portland and often attended the city's more exclusive events. She knew everyone who mattered. "You never know who you'll bump into," Laurel had said with a playful nudge. Charlotte hadn't expected anything remarkable that evening. With no spot reserved at the sponsors' tables, she ended up standing alone near the hors d'oeuvres. That's where Anderson noticed her, a champagne flute in hand, wearing a borrowed sapphire dress that hugged a bit tighter than expected. Their eyes met over silver trays of caviar and pâté, and something clicked. Anderson, then already a self-made millionaire, had taken a once struggling logistics firm and turned it into a powerhouse, Hargrove International. He was confident, with an air of quiet control that could both attract and intimidate. When he walked toward Charlotte, she braced herself for a smug remark or another arrogant opener, the kind she'd heard too often from men in expensive suits. But instead, he surprised her with a simple question. "Why do you look like you'd rather be anywhere else?" Charlotte wasn't sure how to respond at first, but something in Anderson's direct, almost curious tone gave her the courage to speak honestly, a rare kind of honesty that even caught her off guard. "I'm new to this," she admitted quietly. "I don't know this world." Anderson's expression softened, the corners of his mouth lifting in a smile that felt surprisingly sincere. "I wasn't always part of this world either." That single sentence, a shared vulnerability, sealed Charlotte's impression of him. He wasn't just another polished figure in an expensive suit. He had known hardship too. That night, they lost themselves in deep conversation, talking about their childhood dreams, their ambitions, and everything in between, entirely detached from the glittering energy of the event around them. Their romance bloomed quickly and intensely. Within just a few months, Charlotte left behind her familiar routines and modest world. She learned how to navigate the upper crust of society, lavish dinners, formal galas, whispered conversations about mergers and acquisitions. Through it all, Anderson remained gentle, protective, captivated by her earnestness. For every whispered rumor about his fortune or past, Charlotte found countless reasons to believe in him. He had a rare ability to make her feel like she was the most important person in any room. Though her mother, Marie, often fretted about their drastically different upbringings, Charlotte pressed forward. She trusted in the promise Anderson had made the night he proposed. "No matter what comes our way, our love will hold." Their wedding was a dazzling affair, splashed across the pages of local lifestyle magazines. Laurel, radiant in silver, stood proudly as Charlotte's maid of honor. Even Charlotte's father, still recovering from a stroke, summoned the strength to walk her down the aisle. She would never forget the way Anderson looked at her in that moment, like the world had stopped moving. The early days of their marriage were like something out of a dream. Their penthouse just outside downtown Boston, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, offered sweeping views of the skyline. They danced barefoot in the living room late at night, eat takeout in designer gowns and tuxedos, and laugh about how absurd the elite world could be. But as Hargrove International expanded, landing contracts in multiple regions, Anderson became more and more scarce. He always said it was for them, for their comfort, for the family they wanted to build together. Charlotte believed him. She reminded herself constantly that this was the price of success, that his long hours, his absences, didn't mean his love had dimmed. She clung to that belief, that illusion of stability and loyalty, until the afternoon that changed everything. Charlotte had discovered she was pregnant, just a week before it all unraveled. The moment Charlotte saw the two faint pink lines, a mix of joy and nerves surged through her. She could hardly wait to tell Anderson. She imagined his face lighting up with that unmistakable grin he wore only in moments of true happiness. They had often spoken of raising a family together, of filling their home with the sounds of children's laughter and tiny footsteps. Charlotte had no doubts in her heart. This baby would complete their world. That morning, she was meant to meet Laurel for lunch, a perfect moment to share the news with her best friend, who had supported their love story from the beginning. But around 10 a.m., Charlotte received a text. Laurel was apologizing, explaining that an emergency had come up at work. As a project manager at a local arts nonprofit, last-minute schedule changes were just part of the job. Charlotte glanced at the clock and remembered that Anderson had mentioned taking the day off to handle some personal errands. He should have been nearby, maybe even home. A private, heartfelt reveal felt far more meaningful than a rushed phone call. Her excitement building, she got into her car and headed toward the estate, her heart fluttering as she pulled into the curved stone driveway. A sleek red convertible caught her eye, parked casually near the front. Odd. Anderson didn't usually have unexpected visitors, especially on his days off. Perhaps a friend, a colleague. As Charlotte stepped through the front doors, she was struck by how quiet the house was, the kind of stillness that felt too deliberate. Even with the warm daylight pouring through the oversized windows, a chill passed through her. Her steps echoed softly against the polished floors, but her heartbeat felt loud enough to give her away. Then, she heard it. A giggle, muffled, followed by a whisper. The sounds were coming from the living room, the same space meant for hosting dignitaries and family, not whispers and secrecy. Charlotte's chest tightened. Maybe, she reasoned, it was a surprise. Maybe something sweet, something meant for her. But the thought didn't hold. She set her handbag down slowly on a hallway table, whispering Anderson's name gently as she inched toward the room. And then she saw them. Anderson, her husband, her supposed partner and everything, was in a deep, familiar embrace with a woman. One Charlotte recognized instantly, even if only from whispered gossip at society events. Selena Vaughn. A socialite known for clinging to men with money and power. Selena's high-pitched laugh and the casual, possessive way she touched Anderson made it clear this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip. It was routine. Practiced. Intimate. Charlotte froze. Her world collapsed around her, but she forced herself to stay upright, to breathe, to process. She gripped the doorframe, fingers trembling, every part of her screaming to confront him, to cry out. But she didn't. Her eyes met Anderson's, and the shock on his face was instant, undeniable. Selena turned too, her smirk faltering the moment she realized they'd been caught. A guilty shadow passed over her features, but not enough to mask the smugness that had been there moments before. Charlotte stared at Anderson, willing him to speak, to do something, anything to explain what she was seeing, to reject it, to deny it, to say, this isn't what it looks like. But nothing came. No apology, no excuse, only silence. Charlotte, still holding on to the last shred of her dignity, didn't yell. She didn't break down. She didn't go after Selena. She didn't throw anything. She didn't scream. She turned on her heel and walked out. The sound of Anderson calling her name behind her only deepened the crack in her heart. Charlotte kept walking, unwilling to turn around, unwilling to see either of their faces again. She made it to the car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there, frozen for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. The silence inside the vehicle was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the dashboard clock, a cruel reminder that time hadn't stopped with her heartbreak. The pregnancy test tucked inside her purse felt heavier now, like it carried a devastating secret instead of a joyful one. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, who still had no idea he was going to be a father, had been with another woman. So openly, so shamelessly. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, trying to steady the tremor that now ran through her entire body. She dreamed of that moment, revealing the news, seeing his eyes light up, but it had all unraveled in an instant, replaced by a scene she would never forget. Charlotte started the car and drove off, the tires spinning dust behind her as she sped away from the mansion. Still not a single word had passed her lips. She found herself at Laurel Benton's apartment, a small, vibrant place nestled in the heart of downtown Boston. Normally, its warmth and eclectic charm gave Charlotte a sense of calm. But today, nothing could pierce the numbness inside her. Laurel opened the door to find Charlotte pale, shaken, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. Without a word, Laurel pulled her in, guiding her to the couch. Moments later, Charlotte broke down completely, her body racked with sobs so fierce they seemed to come from the center of her soul. It wasn't just sorrow, it was grief, the kind that hollowed her chest and made her shoulders quake with each exhale. She clung to Laurel like she was the only solid thing left in her crumbling world. Between breaths, she told Laurel everything. How she had planned the perfect surprise for Anderson, how she had walked into their home expecting love and instead found betrayal. She forced out the words. He was with Selena Vaughn. Laurel's face hardened with a mix of fury and disbelief. I've heard whispers about her, she murmured, recalling scattered gossip. She's always chasing after rich men, but Anderson, I never thought he would. Charlotte wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. Neither did I. They sat in silence for a long time. Laurel offered quiet comfort, soothing words, a blanket. Eventually, she asked the question neither of them wanted to say aloud. Are you going to tell him about the baby? The question cut deep. Charlotte had gone there to share joy. Now it felt impossible. She stared at Laurel, unsure. How do I tell him that after this? Laurel gently placed a hand over hers. At some point you'll have to decide. About him. About everything. But this baby didn't do anything wrong. Anderson should know. Charlotte nodded slowly, but said nothing. The emotional storm inside her was still too raw. She wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. She stayed at Laurel's for a few days, ignoring the phone calls and unread messages flooding in from Anderson. Each time she thought of him, of what she'd seen, her stomach twisted. And it wasn't just the pregnancy. She kept seeing it. Over and over. His arms wrapped around Selena, their kiss so intimate, so unashamed. And every time that image returned, Charlotte felt like she might collapse all over again. Had Anderson's kindness been just a show? Had his tenderness ever been real? Laurel tried her best to keep Charlotte distracted. They ordered takeout, watched light comedies on the couch, but Charlotte's thoughts never wandered far from the ache inside her chest. There were too many questions, and not a single answer. In her darkest hours, she wondered if the best choice was simply to disappear. Start over. Raise her baby in peace, somewhere far from betrayal, far from broken promises. But deep down, she knew she couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, she would have to confront Anderson. And then, 3 nights after it all came crashing down, fate made the first move. Charlotte woke in Laurel's guest room to the relentless buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. It was nearly midnight. Her heart skipped when she saw the name glowing on the screen, Anderson Hargrove. She watched it buzz once, then again. Something in her chest twisted, wondering if something terrible had happened. Against her better judgment, she answered. Before she could say anything, Anderson's voice poured out, rushed, raw. Charlotte, please. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need to see you. Please, just let me explain. She wanted to hang up, to scream, to tell him there was no explanation in the world that could justify what he'd done. But another part of her, a quieter, wounded part, still longed for a glimpse of the man she thought she married. So, she agreed, reluctantly. They arranged to meet at an all-night diner a few blocks from Laurel's place. It was public, familiar, and Charlotte felt safer knowing she could leave whenever she wanted. Laurel insisted on driving her and waiting nearby, just in case. Charlotte walked into the old diner, greeted by the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, the black and white checkered tile, and the warm scent of burnt coffee. 1,000 memories stirred in her chest. Anderson sat in a corner booth, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, a far cry from his usual polished look. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his hair slightly unkempt. When he saw her, he stood immediately, nervous. Charlotte slid into the seat across from him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest like armor. For a long moment, they said nothing, just stared. Finally, Anderson leaned forward, voice uneven. "I'm sorry, I know those words aren't enough, but I never meant to hurt you." Charlotte's lips quivered. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Then why?" Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't let the tears fall. "Why, Selina? How long?" Anderson exhaled sharply, dropping his gaze. "A few months," he admitted. "But it was stupid, reckless. I never stopped loving you, Charlotte. You have to believe me." "It started during all those endless business trips," Anderson said, voice thick with regret. "I was overwhelmed, and she was there. She made me feel like I still mattered, like I had control when everything else was slipping." Charlotte stared at him, disbelief hardening her features. "You felt like you were losing control," she repeated, her voice bitter. "And your solution was to sleep with someone else?" Anderson winced. "I'm not proud of it. It was a terrible mistake. I don't have any excuse, really. Just the pressure kept building. The new partnerships, the deadlines, everything started to spin. And at home, I saw you pulling away. You didn't seem happy." Charlotte let out a sharp, humorless breath, almost a laugh. "Distant? Did it ever cross your mind to actually talk to me? Ask how I was handling things while you were always gone?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Instead, you leaned on Selina." Anderson's shoulders sagged, his eyes, darkened by sleepless nights, shimmered with regret. "I know, and I wish more than anything I could undo it. But it's over, Charlotte. I ended it the moment you saw us. I swear." He reached across the table slightly, desperate. "I want to make this right. If there's still a chance, if you can find it in your heart to try." Charlotte's breath shook. She wanted to speak, to tell him about the baby, but the words caught in her throat. The moment felt too raw, too fragile. Finally, she whispered, "I need time. I can't just act like none of this happened." Anderson nodded slowly. For the first time since she'd known him, tears filled his eyes. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait, Charlotte. I'm not going anywhere." They parted without closure. Only more questions. Charlotte left the diner feeling numb, her emotions scraped thin. On the way back, Laurel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Did you tell him?" she asked gently. Charlotte shook her head, watching the city blur past outside the window. "I couldn't, not yet." She was scared that Anderson's remorse came from shame or fear of losing his reputation, not from love. And the baby. The baby was too precious to risk on that kind of uncertainty. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte stayed away from the estate. She split her time between Laurel's apartment and her parents' small home in the suburbs. She confided in her mother Marie about the pregnancy, but not about the affair. Marie was thrilled, excited about becoming a grandmother. She believed that Charlotte and Anderson would share the joyful news together soon. Meanwhile, Anderson sent flowers, letters, voicemails. He swore that things with Selina were done. He promised to do whatever it took: therapy, a long vacation, even stepping away from work, anything to rebuild what they had. But Charlotte couldn't bring herself to believe again. Not yet. Seeing him was still too painful. One quiet afternoon, as Charlotte was curled up on Laurel's couch reading, a knock at the door broke the silence. Laurel was at work, so Charlotte got up slowly to answer it. When she opened the door, her breath caught. Standing there in a long, tailored coat and dark sunglasses was Selina Vaughn, the woman who had shattered everything. Charlotte's first instinct was to slam the door shut, but Selina quickly raised a hand. "Please, I'm not here to start anything," she said, pulling off her sunglasses to reveal exhausted eyes. I need to talk to you. Just for a minute." Against every instinct screaming inside her, Charlotte stepped aside. If nothing else, she didn't want a scene in the hallway of Laurel's apartment building. She led Selina to the living room, inwardly fuming with every step. Selina sat gingerly on the edge of the couch, looking uncharacteristically fragile. Charlotte didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice sharp and cold. Selina's hands trembled slightly. "I know this is probably the last thing you want, but I just needed to clear the air. I'm not proud of what happened. I never meant for it to go that far. Charlotte fought back a bitter laugh. Really? You targeted a married man, my husband, and things just got out of hand? Selena's cheeks flushed. I won't pretend I'm blameless. I went after Anderson. I saw his ambition, his drive, and yes, I thought being with him might benefit me. I was lonely. It was selfish, stupid, but it wasn't love. Not for me, and I honestly don't think it was for him either. Charlotte stood stiff, arms crossed. So now you want me to believe you've suddenly grown a conscience? No, Selena said quietly, exhaling. But I need you to know something. After you caught us, Anderson ended it. Immediately. He told me to leave and never come back. He said you were the only one who mattered. Charlotte's expression faltered, just for a second. The words hit somewhere she didn't want to acknowledge. They stirred a part of her that longed for reassurance, even if it came through the most painful source. For days she tried to understand what he truly felt, whether there had been any hesitation in his betrayal. Hearing that he had pushed Selena away, even after the damage was done, made her ache in a new, complicated way. Grief tangled with the smallest thread of vindication. So why are you really telling me this? Selena swallowed. Because I'm leaving. I'm moving to Chicago to live with my sister, trying to reset my life. And before I go, her voice shook, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Honestly, I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it might mean nothing to you, but I couldn't leave without telling you. Something shifted in Charlotte. A lump formed in her throat. She still wanted to hate this woman, but the trembling, the guilt, the unmistakable shame, it dulled the edge of her fury. The apology was imperfect and possibly self-serving, but it was real. In that room, Charlotte saw not a rival, but a woman unraveling, one who had made a choice she now clearly regretted. The bitterness didn't vanish, but it softened, if only slightly. Was Selena telling the full truth? Charlotte didn't know. Maybe it was for closure, maybe just to ease her own guilt. Still, for a moment, Charlotte felt something like relief. Selena reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small envelope. She placed it gently on the coffee table. It's a letter, she said softly. Just my side of things. You don't have to read it. Burn it if you want. I just needed to try. Charlotte didn't respond. After a long pause, Selena stood and walked slowly toward the door. At the threshold, she turned, eyes shining with tears. I truly hope you and Anderson can find your way back, Selena said quietly. He can be an idiot, but he does love you. Without waiting for a response, she turned and left. Charlotte sank onto the couch, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her eyes locked onto the envelope, resting on the coffee table like it might explode. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, unsure if she should open it or toss it out the nearest window. In the end, curiosity and some small thread of humanity won out. The letter was brief. Selena described how her life had unraveled after losing her job, how she'd begun relying on wealthy men as a way to feel secure, convinced that money could protect her from failure. It was part confession, part apology. And it ended with a plea that Charlotte consider Anderson's genuine remorse. Charlotte set the letter aside, heart heavy. She didn't know whether to forgive or to hate. What she did know was that she felt completely drained. And beneath that weariness, just a faint flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. Hope. 2 days after Selena's visit, Charlotte realized she couldn't keep the pregnancy hidden much longer. She was nearly 3 months along now, and the morning sickness was getting harder to ignore, along with the emotional weight she carried daily. So, with a shaky breath and cautious resolve, she called Anderson and asked to meet. Somewhere neutral, somewhere quiet. They agreed on a bench near the edge of public garden, overlooking the Charles River. Charlotte arrived early. The late afternoon light was soft, the autumn sun stretching long golden beams across the lawn. She settled onto the wooden bench, one hand gently resting over her belly, an unconscious act of protection and reassurance. When Anderson arrived, she could read the unease in his posture from across the lawn. He approached slowly and took a seat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. After a pause, he spoke. You look well, he said gently. I've been worried. Charlotte gave a small nod, her throat tight. I'm coping. Anderson exhaled slowly. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. Charlotte didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on the river as she gathered the strength to speak. "I have something to tell you. Something I wanted to say the day I saw you." Her voice cracked. She closed her eyes, willing the pain down, and whispered, "I'm pregnant, Anderson." The words lingered in the air between them, weighty and vulnerable. Anderson's eyes went wide. For a long second he just stared at her. Then slowly, cautiously, he reached for her hand. She allowed it, though her fingers stayed tense. "Pregnant," he echoed, his voice thick with shock, awe, and the unmistakable tinge of guilt. "Charlotte, I don't even know what to say, except I'm so sorry," Anderson said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry you had to carry this alone, even for a day." Tears slid down Charlotte's cheeks. "I wanted to tell you in a happy moment," she said, voice trembling, "but that moment is gone." Anderson's grip on her hand tightened slightly, protectively. "I know I've destroyed your trust," he said, eyes shining with regret. "But please believe me, I'll do anything to be a good father to our child, anything to fix what I broke. If that means therapy, or stepping away from my company, or even letting you go if that's what you need, I'll do it." Charlotte looked at him closely. There were real tears there. His voice was thick with emotion, and for the first time in weeks she saw the man she had fallen in love with. Imperfect, flawed, but capable of genuine feeling. Her anger stirred again, but it mixed with something softer. Relief. He wasn't blaming her. He wasn't minimizing what he had done. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "Not yet. But I do know this baby deserves a father and a mother who at least tried to do the right thing." Anderson nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you. Thank you for even giving me a chance." They talked for nearly an hour, carefully, tentatively outlining what might come next. Charlotte agreed to continue staying at her parents' place for now, to think clearly, away from the pressure. Anderson offered to cover all her medical expenses and asked if he could come to the ultrasound appointments, only if she was okay with it. He admitted again how his affair with Selena had been the greatest mistake of his life. Something he would regret every single day. Charlotte's heart felt heavy, still cracked, but she also saw sincerity in the way Anderson spoke, saw the steps he was taking, saw that his remorse wasn't just words. By the time the sun had dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in streaks of lavender and amber, they parted, not with a grand reconciliation, but with something quieter, a fragile hope. It wasn't the reunion of a romance novel. It was awkward, tender, uncertain. But it was something. For the first time since that awful day, Charlotte felt like she didn't have to carry everything alone. In the months that followed, she allowed Anderson to attend her prenatal appointments. He always arrived with tension in his shoulders, as though he feared she might change her mind and shut him out. But each time he saw the baby on the ultrasound monitor, each time he heard the strong, steady heartbeat, he was overcome. Eyes misty, hands shaking. Charlotte saw it. He wanted to be there. She remained at her parents' home, turning the old guest room into a temporary nursery. It wasn't the luxurious setting she'd imagined. She had once dreamed of decorating a sleek modern space in their penthouse. But this quieter, simpler life felt more real. There was something deeply grounding about being back at home, where her mother simmered soup on the stove and her father offered quiet, reassuring advice. Charlotte found peace in the simplicity, in the rhythm of her roots. Her mother, Marie, was visibly thrilled to see Anderson arriving with groceries, parenting books, and small, thoughtful gifts for Charlotte. But Marie didn't know the full story. She sensed something was off, but assumed it was just the usual nervousness between first-time parents. Charlotte couldn't bear to shatter her mother's joy, so she said nothing about the affair. As the pregnancy progressed, Charlotte agreed to let Anderson attend birthing classes. Laurel, ever the unwavering friend, often accompanied them, not just to support Charlotte, but to offer an emotional buffer whenever Anderson was present. Anderson, for his part, made a concerted effort to prove he had changed. He scaled back his business trips, personally oversaw smaller contracts at Hargrove International so he could stay local, and even delegated key responsibilities to his longtime business partner, Marcus Delaney. Marcus, who had co-led several expansion projects with Anderson, pulled Charlotte aside one day. "He's not the same man," he told her softly. "He's more grounded, more focused. He regrets everything, genuinely." Marcus's words gave Charlotte a cautious thread of hope. But hope for her had become a fragile thing. Beautiful, yes, but easily bruised. Even with small signs of healing, the nights remained hardest. It was in those quiet hours, curled on her childhood bed, surrounded by familiar wallpaper and fading photo frames, that her self-doubt crept in like fog under a door. She caught herself staring at her reflection in the mirror, tracing the stretch marks along her side, the gentle swell of her belly, the circles under her eyes. She no longer felt like the woman Anderson had once pursued so relentlessly. No longer glamorous, no longer confident. Alone in her childhood bedroom, Charlotte would rest a hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of tiny kicks, and wonder if her baby would grow up in a home split by lies. That thought haunted her night after night until sleep finally pulled her under. Just when Charlotte began to believe forgiveness might be possible, a storm of doubt returned. One morning, Laurel rushed into the family house, her face tight with worry. "Charlotte," she said breathlessly, "have you seen the tabloids today?" Charlotte's stomach dropped. "No." "Why?" Laurel handed over her phone. There on the screen, splashed across a local gossip blog, was a photograph of Anderson exiting a downtown restaurant, with an attractive woman beside him. The headline screamed, "Anderson Hargrove spotted with new flame." Charlotte's gut twisted. A surge of nausea and rage climbed her throat. Her hands trembled with the urge to hurl the phone across the room. Not again. She forced herself to read the article, slowly, carefully. It claimed that an anonymous source had spotted Anderson with the woman, allegedly kissing her, 2 nights ago. That same night, he had told Charlotte he was staying late to work on a proposal. The article rehashed old rumors about him and Selena, painting Anderson as a chronic cheater. Laurel's voice dropped. "I checked the timestamp. It matches. That night, he told you he had a meeting." Charlotte swallowed hard, her chest tightening. The sting of déjà vu hit her like a wave. Memories of walking in on him with Selena, of shattered trust, of the aching silence that followed. Could he really be making the same mistake again? Now, of all times, while she was carrying their child. Without hesitation, Charlotte dialed Anderson's number. He answered after a few rings, his voice steady. "Charlotte?" She didn't waste time. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to sound firm. "Is there something you want to tell me about 2 nights ago? Because the tabloids are filled with pictures of you. With another woman." She could hear him exhale hard. "Her name is Adriana King," he said quickly. "She's an investor from Los Angeles. We had dinner to discuss a potential deal. That's all it was." Charlotte's jaw clenched. "The article says you were kissing." His voice rose, frustrated. "I didn't kiss her. I wouldn't. Not now, not ever. Charlotte, I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I swear this was just business. When we left the restaurant, she hugged me goodbye. Maybe it looked too familiar in a still photo, but that's all it was." Charlotte's mind raced. A few months ago, she would have believed him without hesitation. But now? Now, there was always a shadow of doubt. She remembered how sincere he had seemed even while secretly seeing Selena. She pressed a hand against her belly, closing her eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Anderson," she whispered. "But I can't live like this, constantly doubting you." Anderson's voice cracked. "I get it. Let me prove I'm telling the truth. I'll ask Adriana to talk to you if that helps. I'll do anything." Charlotte paused. The exhaustion in her chest was growing. Still, a small part of her wanted to believe this time might be different. "For the baby's sake," she said, voice low, "I hope you're telling the truth." Then she ended the call. In the days that followed, Charlotte avoided Anderson's calls, replying only with brief texts. She had a prenatal appointment the following week, but hadn't decided if she wanted him to come. Then, in the middle of all that emotional chaos, came an unexpected knock at the door. Charlotte was mid-stretch in a quiet yoga session when her mother stepped into the room. "There's a woman here," Marie said. "Says she's a businesswoman, Adriana King." Charlotte froze. When she stepped into the hallway, she found Adriana waiting. The woman was striking, tall, sharply dressed, and carrying herself with an air of polished confidence. She introduced herself with poise, then got straight to the point. "I'm sorry to intrude, Miss Hargrove," she said. "But Anderson told me about the rumors. I wanted to address them myself." Charlotte blinked, startled by her presence. "Nothing inappropriate happened that evening," Adriana continued. The paparazzi caught a misleading angle, and I refused to let my professional reputation be dragged into baseless gossip. I understand you may not trust me, but I couldn't just let this go unaddressed. Charlotte's face flushed. She wasn't sure how to react to Adriana's assertiveness, whether to admire her boldness or be taken aback by it. "You came all the way here just to say that?" Charlotte asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Adriana's expression softened slightly. "I flew in for other meetings anyway," Adriana said calmly. "But yes, I felt it was important to clear this up. Anderson told me he wants to rebuild your trust, and he thought maybe hearing from me directly would help." She held Charlotte's gaze with a composed, direct expression. "I'm not here to interfere in your marriage," she continued, "but I do want to protect the integrity of our business dealings. False rumors can derail more than reputations." Charlotte studied her, trying to read past the surface. But there was something steady and sincere in Adriana's tone, something honest in the way she carried herself. For the first time, Charlotte felt a flicker of calm. Could it be true? That Anderson had changed, and the tabloids were simply chasing drama? Tentatively, Charlotte said, "Thank you. I appreciate you coming here. It's complicated." Adriana nodded, her expression softening. "I understand. My parents went through something similar when I was younger. I know how messy and painful this can be, but if you ever want clarification, I'm happy to talk again. And for what it's worth, Anderson talks about you and the baby often. He really seems to care." Charlotte blinked back tears, surprised by how moved she felt. After a short silence, Adriana offered a polite goodbye and left. Charlotte watched her go, torn between emotional fatigue and a quiet sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, she had nearly let the past steal a second chance. Later that week, Charlotte finally agreed to see Anderson again, at her upcoming prenatal appointment. In the softly lit exam room, the technician guided them through the scan. Anderson held Charlotte's hand tightly, his gaze locked on the monitor, awe spreading across his face. The baby's tiny limbs moved slightly, and the rhythmic thump of the heartbeat filled the quiet room. When it was over, Anderson walked her to her car. The air was cold, and Charlotte had bundled up in a thick coat, her small bump hidden beneath layers. Anderson's eyes lingered on it, a quiet smile curving his lips. "Thank you for letting me come," he said gently. Charlotte looked up at him. His face was etched with regret, but also hope and fear. "I'm still hurt, Anderson," she admitted. "Some nights I see it all again, you and her, and it still cuts deep. But this baby deserves a father, and maybe there's still something between us worth holding on to." Anderson let out a breath of relief, nodding solemnly. "I'll prove it to you. Every day. I'll give you no reason to doubt me again." In the weeks that followed, they found a cautious rhythm. Charlotte let him help with preparing the nursery, choosing a gentle, neutral color for the walls, shopping for furniture, tossing around baby names. Some evenings, Anderson would join Charlotte and her mother for dinner. He helped Marie in the kitchen, offering quiet gestures of support. Anderson even began accompanying Charlotte's father on his daily walks around the neighborhood, quietly listening as the older man recounted childhood stories about Charlotte. Bit by bit, Charlotte began to see a real shift in Anderson. His once relentless obsession with corporate growth had softened. He redirected his energy towards smaller, community-focused projects, ones that kept him close to home. He even surprised Laurel by quietly donating to her nonprofit organization and showing up for a volunteer day, something that left her visibly stunned. Charlotte wasn't naive. She understood that trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. But as her belly rounded and the baby kicked more often, her guarded heart began to ease. There was a life growing inside her, one that deserved peace and stability. And maybe, just maybe, Anderson was becoming the man he had once promised to be. Yet with every moment of calm, Charlotte found herself stealing glances over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Healing was not linear. Some nights, she'd wake up drenched in sweat from dreams she couldn't shake, visions of Selena, of betrayal, of press scandals flashing across television screens. She wanted to believe in Anderson's transformation, but the ache of uncertainty still curled around her like smoke. But just as things began to settle, a new twist threatened that fragile peace. Late one evening, Charlotte's phone rang. She froze when she saw the name, Selena Vaughn. She hadn't heard from Selena since the day she showed up to apologize. Charlotte nearly let the call go to voicemail, but something told her to answer. Selena's voice was quiet, almost hoarse. "Charlotte, I'm in Chicago. I'm calling to warn you." Charlotte's stomach tightened. "Warn me about what?" "I overheard something at a hotel lounge. Some people were talking about trying to ruin Anderson. They're planning to spread rumors, cheating, financial misconduct, everything. I didn't catch every detail, but it sounded like someone from his own company is behind it." Charlotte's pulse raced. "Who?" There was a name mentioned. Carter. Someone Carter. They were talking about forging documents, creating fake reports, trying to exploit the tension in his personal life to get him removed as CEO. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Carter. The only Carter she knew connected to Anderson's business was Anthony Carter, a major investor, one who had a long, contentious history with Anderson. Could he really be behind something like this? Selena's voice trembled. "I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I couldn't keep this to myself. If you need me to come forward to testify, I will. I owe you that much." Charlotte gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles whitening. She hated that help might come from someone who once shattered her world, yet a strange wave of gratitude washed over her. In that moment, it wasn't about old wounds. It was about survival, about protecting what little they were rebuilding. Charlotte's thoughts raced. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. Charlotte murmured something unintelligible, unsure what else to say. When the call ended, she stood there frozen. Was Anderson on the verge of losing everything, just as he was trying to piece his life back together with her? She immediately dialed his number, heart pounding. Anderson answered, and Charlotte breathlessly recounted everything Selena had told her. Instead of brushing it off, Anderson went quiet for a beat. Then she heard him say, "I believe it. Anthony Carter's been pressuring me about a series of risky expansions I refused to greenlight. He wants me out. I knew he could be manipulative, but this is next-level betrayal." Charlotte's hands shook. "What do we do?" Anderson's voice was calm but steady. "I'll handle it. I'm pulling my legal team together tonight. If Carter wants a war, he'll get one. But I won't let this take us down. Not again." In the storm that followed, Charlotte and Anderson found themselves unexpectedly united. As rumors of Anderson's supposed mismanagement began circulating in industry circles, the Hargroves stood side by side. Charlotte, who had once considered walking away for good, chose to believe in Anderson's sincerity and defend his name. Together, they gathered evidence, email threads, internal memos, eyewitness accounts, and legal records to expose Anthony Carter's smear campaign. Marcus Delaney played a pivotal role in helping the board see through the lies. Laurel tapped into her nonprofit's network to connect them with advisors experienced in corporate sabotage. Amid the chaos, Charlotte saw something in Anderson she hadn't seen in a long time: unwavering integrity. He refused to stoop to dirty tactics. Instead, he insisted on due process, allowing the truth to come to light through legitimate channels. In that conviction, Charlotte saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man who once built his company from the ground up through hard work and integrity. They spent long nights reviewing documents, drafting affidavits, and meeting with lawyers. Often, Charlotte would fall asleep on the living room couch at her parents' home, only to wake up with a blanket gently placed over her, and Anderson quietly working beside her. The baby's approaching arrival offered a beacon in the storm, a reminder of what truly mattered. Eventually, Anderson's legal team uncovered the smoking gun: falsified documents, doctored spreadsheets, and damning text messages outlining Carter's plan to destroy Anderson's credibility, both professionally and personally. Faced with criminal charges and public disgrace, Carter resigned from Hargrove International and disappeared from the spotlight. The scandal had nearly unraveled everything, but in a strange, unexpected way, it had also brought Charlotte and Anderson closer. Their shared efforts to defend Anderson's reputation and secure the company's future reignited the bond they had nearly lost. Late nights, once filled with accusations and silence, were now spent strategizing with attorneys, supporting each other like true partners. Even Laurel, initially wary of Anderson's redemption, was quietly impressed. She saw how he held firm in the face of pressure, refusing shortcuts, never speaking ill of Carter, and always taking responsibility. Charlotte, though not fully healed, couldn't ignore the changes. Anderson stood differently now. Less ego, more humility. Less reaction, more resolve. She still carried wounds, but now they were mixed with something else. Hope. Watching Anderson meticulously gather evidence against Carter, consult with Marcus Delaney, and consistently keep Charlotte informed throughout the ordeal, she began to see again the determined, unwavering version of Anderson that had once inspired her complete trust. Yet even as the corporate threat began to unravel, another profound challenge loomed on the horizon: the imminent arrival of their baby. Charlotte's pregnancy was in its final stages, and with each passing day came a cocktail of anticipation, anxiety, and quiet fear. She knew the emotional scars she carried might reopen under the strain of labor or moments of stress. She prepared herself diligently, reading everything she could about childbirth and newborn care. To her surprise, Anderson did the same. They exchanged name ideas late into the night, took careful notes in birthing classes, and had heartfelt discussions about the kind of parents they hoped to be: calm, present, and resilient, determined not to let the past dictate their child's future. On a crisp spring morning, soft sunlight filtered through the pale curtains of the guest room in her parents' home. Charlotte woke with a persistent ache in her lower back, something deeper, different from the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. By mid-morning, the twinges had sharpened into a consistent rhythm. Marie hovered near her daughter anxiously, insisting she call Anderson right away. When Charlotte finally did, Anderson answered on the second ring. His voice was composed, but layered with anticipation and urgency. "Let's get to the hospital," he said, already grabbing his coat and heading out of his office at Hargrove International. Charlotte's father, still recovering from his stroke, insisted on coming along. He reminded them that if he had managed to walk her down the aisle, he wouldn't miss this milestone either. Marie helped him into a wheelchair, and with Laurel behind the wheel of Charlotte's car, they raced through the streets of Boston toward the hospital. The maternity ward was a blur of nurses, polished linoleum, and soft beeping monitors. A kind nurse led Charlotte and Anderson to a private birthing suite outfitted with every medical device imaginable. Marie and Laurel waited just outside as Anderson remained rooted by Charlotte's side, his hand clasping hers as she breathed through the early contractions. Despite everything they had endured, a quiet tenderness passed between them, a silent pact that, whatever came next, they would face it together. As the hours stretched and the pain intensified, Charlotte's strength began to wane. Tears prickled her eyes, drawn not only by the physical toll, but by the sheer emotional gravity of it all. She was about to bring new life into a world where she and Anderson had once almost lost each other. Whenever her strength waned, Anderson leaned close, whispering soft words of encouragement, gently dabbing her forehead with cool cloths, reminding her of the precious child waiting to meet them. Even Marie, normally a steady presence, showed signs of strain. She paced the corridor, glancing anxiously toward the delivery room. Occasionally, Laurel would peek in and offer a quiet update before carefully closing the door again so Charlotte could focus. Near midnight, a nurse announced Charlotte was fully dilated. Suddenly, the room swelled with activity. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, adjusting equipment, preparing the bed, checking monitors. In that breathless space between fear and expectation, Charlotte's entire body trembled as she followed the doctor's cues, pushing with each contraction while the staff counted out loud. Anderson held her, bracing her shoulders, whispering constantly in her ear, telling her how incredible she was, how close they were. The nurse shouted encouragement over the sound of Charlotte's labored breathing. And then, after what felt like a lifetime, a sharp cry rang out. The doctor lifted a tiny wriggling baby and placed her on Charlotte's chest. Warm tears spilled down Charlotte's cheeks as she gazed at her daughter's red, crying face. She caught a glimpse of Anderson beside her, tears streaming freely, mouth slightly open in awe. "She's here," he whispered, voice breaking with emotion. "Avery Grace." Charlotte's heart swelled, so full it nearly ached. She let the baby's delicate fingers curl around hers, breath hitching at the raw miracle of it all. This moment, messy, overwhelming, and unspeakably beautiful, was the culmination of everything: the pain, the healing, the fragile hope they'd rebuilt. Once Avery was gently cleaned, measured, and wrapped in a soft blanket, Anderson held her for the first time. The way he cradled their daughter, eyes wide with wonder, but carrying the same fierce determination he'd shown while fighting for his family's name, moved Charlotte beyond words. Their eyes met across the room, and in that glance, a quiet understanding passed between them. This child, this new chapter, was the true promise they were meant to fulfill all along. When Marie and Charlotte's father finally entered the room, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. Even Laurel, usually the most composed of them all, blinked quickly and wiped at her eyes as she leaned over to marvel at the baby. Charlotte's father, seated in his wheelchair, extended a trembling hand to stroke Avery's downy hair, while Marie beamed with pride, her smile lighting the entire room. "You did it," she whispered, kissing Charlotte's forehead. "She's perfect." Charlotte felt depleted in every limb, but more complete than she had ever been. Not even the memory of betrayal, not the swirling rumors or painful past could dim the brilliance of this new life. Later, when the nurses settled her into recovery, Charlotte drifted between exhaustion and bliss. She glanced at Anderson, who hadn't budged, even when the nurses gently urged him to rest. He sat beside her, eyes locked on Avery, captivated by every little sound and movement. The same man who had once reached the pinnacle of success and nearly lost everything through a careless mistake, now looked like someone forever changed, humbled by the most precious gift he'd ever received. As the hospital settled into nighttime silence, Anderson leaned close, resting one hand atop the soft swaddle that enveloped their daughter. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I promise you," he said, choked with emotion, "I'll spend every day proving that you and our daughter are my entire world." Charlotte's eyes fluttered open to meet his. For a flicker of a second, the memory of Selena, of the betrayal in that living room, hovered in the back of her mind. But in this quiet space, surrounded by warmth and love, another memory took its place. A memory not of pain, but of forgiveness earned, not simply given. She reached out and touched Anderson's face gently. "I believe you," she said, and those 3 words carried a weight Charlotte had once been too afraid to offer. And with that quiet affirmation, they stepped into the next chapter of their lives, committed to honoring the fragile miracle in their arms, the child who had already taught them more about love and redemption than any crisis they had endured. Life didn't magically become perfect after Avery's birth. Trust wasn't restored overnight. Charlotte still had moments where past wounds crept back in, and Anderson carried his own shame, the guilt that surfaced whenever he caught a fleeting look of sadness in Charlotte's eyes. But together, they committed to the work. They started couples therapy, where Charlotte finally voiced the hurt she had bottled up since discovering Anderson's betrayal. And he listened, without excuses, without defensiveness. He owned his actions and allowed her to grieve, and slowly the real healing began. Hargrove International weathered the fallout and emerged stronger. Anderson restructured the leadership hierarchy, ensuring no single individual could amass unchecked power again. He also turned to Charlotte for guidance on the company's philanthropic efforts, drawing on her empathy and vision to shape its future. Eventually, they moved back into the penthouse. But only after Charlotte decided she was ready, when the place no longer echoed with pain, but with potential. Some nights, after Avery had drifted off in her nursery, Charlotte and Anderson would sit together on the balcony, sipping tea, gazing over the glittering Boston skyline. The silence between them no longer stung. It had become a soft, mutual peace, a reflection of words they no longer needed to speak. They had endured betrayal, heartbreak, and public scrutiny. And though they were not unmarked by it, they were wiser, stronger, and more closely bound. Charlotte often reflected on the day she had walked in on Anderson and Selena. The way her voice failed her, not from weakness, but from shock so deep it silenced everything. But now, she realized that silence had also been strength. A quiet grace that allowed her to pause, to wait for the whole truth before making a choice. That same resilience was what carried them to this new place, where honesty ran deeper, where forgiveness was earned and not assumed. Their story continued, not as a fairy tale, but as a woven tapestry of pain, hope, and deliberate healing, for the sake of a child and the hope of a better tomorrow. He was poised to double it yet again. Anderson now resided in the prestigious Boston neighborhood of Beacon Hill, where cobblestone streets and historic mansions painted a picture of timeless elegance. His name was spoken in hushed tones by neighbors, a blend of envy and admiration. He had it all, or so it seemed. But in the quiet, dim corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a summer storm. Anderson craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline and the rush of conquering whatever was placed in his path. His wife, Charlotte Hargrove, was the very image of elegance and quiet strength. Once a passionate writer, she had set aside her dreams for the role of corporate wife, supporting her husband at fundraisers, black tie events, and boardroom galas. Though she harbored her own quiet yearnings, Charlotte clung fiercely to love and loyalty. Now, 9 months pregnant with their first child, her round belly symbolized a dream long awaited. Yet, the soft glow that once lit her features had faded in recent weeks, replaced by the deep furrows of worry born from suspicion and solitude. There was an unspoken tension inside their Beacon Hill home. Lately, Anderson had been distant, his time swallowed up by late nights in his home office or back-to-back business dinners. Charlotte couldn't help but wonder, had she done something wrong? Was her pregnancy overwhelming him? Or worse, was someone else now holding space in his heart? The silence in their shared spaces became deafening. Every unanswered text, every dinner eaten alone, left Charlotte feeling more like an ornament than a partner. She would catch herself staring out the window for hours, hoping to hear the sound of his key turning in the door, her mind cycling through memories of a time when his gaze lit up at the sight of her. She tried to dismiss the thought, but a woman's intuition is rarely wrong. Then came the clue she couldn't ignore. One evening, while rifling through Anderson's coat for her spare car keys, Charlotte found a receipt from an upscale jeweler tucked into his inner pocket. The purchase, a diamond-studded bracelet. Inscribed on it, "To my shining star." Charlotte's name held no H, and although the initials matched her husband's, the inscription seemed too personal, too intimate. Her stomach twisted with unease. She tried to rationalize, perhaps a gift for a business partner or a donation token for an upcoming gala. But doubt had already begun to spread its roots. That night, as she lay in bed beside an empty pillow, Charlotte cradled her belly and whispered to the child growing within her, trying to find comfort in the heartbeat of someone who hadn't yet betrayed her. The tears that silently streamed down her cheeks weren't just from betrayal, they were from loneliness. In the following days, Charlotte's awareness sharpened. She saw Anderson's phone flash with messages from someone labeled simply AP. She heard his tone shift whenever he answered calls late at night. The emotional gap between them widened until it felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Still, she clung to hope. She told herself that once their child arrived, everything would realign. But Charlotte didn't know how close her carefully constructed reality was to unraveling. The quiet foundation of her marriage stood on the edge of collapse. Anderson's secret had a name: Aurora Preston. She was fire to Charlotte's calm, sharp-witted, magnetic, and unapologetically captivating. With chestnut hair and sapphire eyes, Aurora exuded a confidence that made it easy to understand why Anderson had strayed. They had met 6 months earlier at a gala benefiting the Boston Fine Arts Collective. Anderson had attended out of obligation more than interest, but when he caught sight of Aurora across the ballroom, laughing easily, dressed in a sleek onyx gown, something inside him stirred. Their introduction was innocent. Aurora had complimented him on his contributions to the city's youth art initiatives. A drink turned into 2, then into weekly meetups at a discreet downtown lounge, hidden from Beacon Hill's judging eyes. They told themselves it was harmless. But soon, boundaries faded. What started as flirtation turned into familiarity, into promises. Aurora wasn't some naive dreamer chasing a wealthy man. She had built her own career, curating modern exhibits and hosting panels across the country. She had choices. Yet something about Anderson captivated her. Maybe it was the melancholy just beneath his smooth facade, or the feeling that she could be the spark missing from his highly controlled world. He whispered about Paris, about lakefront retreats and gallery tours in Italy. He promised her a life filled with possibility and passion. Aurora wanted to believe him. But the ring he sometimes forgot to remove told another story. She asked about Charlotte once, and Anderson's response was always the same, dismissive, vague. She doesn't understand me anymore. It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do. We're practically living separate lives now, Anderson told Aurora, his tone heavy with conviction. He spoke of divorce as if it were a foregone conclusion, painting a bleak picture of a marriage that existed only on paper, more of a partnership than a love story. There were stolen weekends on the Maine coast, secret lunches tucked away in Cambridge bistros, and whispered midnight calls laced with longing. It was easy for Aurora to lose herself in the illusion. She needed the rush just as much, thriving on the secrecy, the electricity. But beneath that craving lived a softer hope. She longed to be more than a hidden lover. She believed Anderson when he said it would soon be just them. No more lies. As Charlotte's pregnancy neared its final weeks, the pressure around Anderson grew like a tightening noose. He was edgy, constantly checking his phone, eyes darting with a kind of hunted alertness. Aurora noticed the tension in his voice, the weight behind his silences. A storm was coming. She could feel it. But she clung to the dream he had spun so confidently. This was Anderson Hargrove, the charismatic mogul who had never failed at anything. If anyone could deliver the impossible, surely it was him. What Aurora didn't know was that Anderson was balancing on a knife's edge, and one misstep could send everything into chaos. Back at the Hargrove brownstone, the air thickened with apprehension. Charlotte's due date loomed, and with it came waves of emotional uncertainty. She was haunted by a gnawing fear about becoming a mother, fear about her distant husband, and worst of all, fear that there was a truth she couldn't bear to confront. One evening over dinner, she tried to reach him. Her voice was soft, her demeanor tentative, but her eyes searched his face with quiet desperation. "Anderson," she began gently, her fingers circling the rim of her water glass. "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, caught off guard. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is." He gave a thin smile, but his eyes lacked any warmth. Charlotte hesitated. She thought about the bracelet receipt, the strange late-night texts, the cold silence in their bed. She wanted to ask outright, to bring it into the light. But her courage faltered. Speaking the suspicion aloud would make it real. Instead, she asked, barely above a whisper, "Don't you think we should spend some time together before the baby arrives? Just a short getaway?" Anderson's face stiffened. The idea of leaving Boston, of stepping away from the entangled web of his business and his affair, felt suffocating. "We'll have time," he said curtly, already glancing back at his phone, as if the conversation were over. That night, Charlotte cried quietly under the covers while Anderson fell asleep in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and secret messages from Aurora. The future that once promised family and warmth now felt distant, brittle, frozen. If only Charlotte had known how tangled things truly were behind closed doors. Days later, a literal and emotional storm descended over Beacon Hill. A slow-moving front churned in from the Atlantic, threatening Boston with sheets of rain and fierce winds. The local news issued warnings of flooding and storm damage, but no forecast could predict the turmoil rising inside the Hargrove household. While Charlotte readied herself for labor, Aurora prepared to stake her claim. She had grown tired of Anderson's delays and empty reassurances. Why wouldn't he make their relationship public? Why did he keep dodging the conversation about leaving his wife? Her frustration festered into bitterness, and that bitterness soon morphed into bold resolve. Late one evening, she texted him, "Aurora, we need to talk. Face to face. I want answers." But answers were the last thing Anderson was ready to give. His business was hanging in a delicate balance. He was on the cusp of securing a development project near Charleston that would net him millions. He couldn't afford distraction or scandal. He replied with a terse message, "Anderson, soon, my star. I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Aurora stared at the screen, her heart twisting between hope and fury. Was she just another dalliance? A secret he never intended to bring into the light? The urge to make herself seen, to show up unannounced at the Hargrove brownstone or at Anderson's firm, burned within her. But fear of losing him kept her in check, for now. Back at the brownstone, Charlotte moved through her days in solitude. She filled the hours prepping the nursery. its walls painted a soothing shade of sage, the crib crafted from imported walnut. But no matter how beautiful the space, a hollowness echoed through every polished corner of the home. She told herself that if Anderson wouldn't confide in her, she would uncover the truth herself. None of them, not Anderson, not Charlotte, not Aurora, realized that the storm rolling in from the sea was nothing compared to the one brewing in their lives. Charlotte's birthday arrived in the thick of the storm. Rain lashed against the brownstone windows, wind bent the trees along their gated street, and thunder rolled like distant drums. It was the kind of day meant for huddling close, for comfort and warmth. She never expected lavish gifts, never had. A loving note or a warm embrace was more than enough. In past years, Anderson would fill the room with roses, book dinners at rooftop restaurants, whisper promises between candlelit toasts. They'd laugh about baby names and plan getaways. But this year, there was no card. No flowers, not even a message. Charlotte woke early, her heart stirring with reluctant hope. Maybe there was a surprise planned. Maybe he was just running late. But the only sound was the rain, and the silence hurt more than words ever could. She had to allow him the benefit of the doubt. Charlotte took a long shower, dressed in a soft, oversized sweater that stretched comfortably over her heavily pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The brownstone was quiet, almost hauntingly so. Every footstep echoed like a reminder of her solitude. By mid-morning, her phone remained stubbornly silent. No calls, no texts, just the relentless tapping of rain against the windows. She sat curled on the couch in the living room, nursing a cup of herbal tea, staring blankly at the drizzle beyond the glass. Her tears stayed tucked behind her eyes, though the ache in her chest deepened with every hour that passed. Meanwhile, Anderson was nowhere near Beacon Hill. He was in a luxury penthouse suite overlooking the harbor, shielded from the city's noise and from the reality he left behind. A morning conference call had turned into a drawn-out lunch with investors, and that had drifted effortlessly into an intimate dinner. Through it all, Aurora was by his side. She had demanded they meet face to face. No more vague promises, no more delays. Anderson, feeling cornered yet eager to placate her, framed it as a business meeting. In truth, the lines between business and pleasure had long since blurred. In the dimly lit penthouse, filled with clinking glasses and velvet whispers, Aurora pressed him harder than ever before. "You said you'd leave Charlotte before the baby came," she murmured, green eyes locked onto his. "So we could finally have a life together. You promised." Anderson rubbed his temple, searching the ceiling as though it held an answer. "Things are complicated, Aurora. You know that," he said gently, the same tone he used to diffuse arguments and delay decisions. "After this deal closes, I'll make the move. I promise." A distant rumble of thunder rolled in from the coast. Lightning flashed faintly on the horizon. Anderson's phone buzzed where it sat on the coffee table, lighting up with an alert. He didn't bother checking it. Aurora's voice, her attention, the illusion of freedom, these were his distractions. Not once did the date cross his mind. Not once did he remember. Back at the brownstone, the storm outside mirrored the one inside. Still no message, no call, no sign that her birthday had even occurred to him. Charlotte sat alone, lights off, listening to the rain. She placed a hand over her belly, whispered to the baby, and made a quiet vow. "After you're born, I will ask for the truth, directly, without fear, whether it broke her or not." For Anderson, forgetting Charlotte's birthday while she carried their child was more than a simple mistake. It was the first crack in the facade, the first domino in what would soon become a chain of irreversible consequences. The morning after, the storm clouds had cleared from the sky, but not from their lives. Charlotte rose slowly, her limbs heavy and her heart numb. She hadn't slept well. Each time Charlotte closed her eyes, flashes of birthdays past drifted through her mind like fading photographs. She remembered how Anderson once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride over Napa Valley, how he once serenaded her on a quiet balcony in Santorini. Those memories now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. By morning, Charlotte resolved to confront him, but when she reached the master bedroom, it was empty. His side of the bed undisturbed. On the nightstand, his phone was gone, and so was he. Instead, a folded note lay where his phone should have been. "Early meeting. Don't wait up." The message struck her like a slap. blunt, indifferent. Her birthday had passed without so much as a whisper. She wondered bitterly if he had even remembered. By midday, Charlotte decided she couldn't live under the weight of silent suspicion anymore. She needed proof. Not feelings, not intuition. Tangible, undeniable evidence. She entered Anderson's home office. It was an imposing room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thick volumes on market theory, negotiation, and leadership. A massive mahogany desk stood at the center, polished and cold. Charlotte's heart pounded as she searched the drawers until she found a small, narrow key tucked in a side compartment. She had seen Anderson use it before. It clicked open the bottom drawer with a quiet snap. Inside was a stack of neatly arranged documents. But what caught her attention was a slim, black leather-bound journal, wedged between manila folders. Her hands trembled as she flipped through it. Travel itineraries to luxury resorts, boutique shopping receipts for silk lingerie and jewelry she'd never seen, and photos. Dozens of them. Selfies of Anderson with a striking woman, laughing at restaurants, wandering through art galleries, lounging on a private yacht. Each snapshot captured a version of him that Charlotte no longer recognized. The woman was effortlessly beautiful, sleek, stylish, and confident. Aurora. It wasn't jealousy that burned in Charlotte's chest, it was the depth of betrayal, the clarity of heartbreak. Her breath came in short, tight gasps, but no tears fell. Not yet. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps. She quickly shoved the journal and receipts back into the drawer, locked it, and slipped the key into her pocket just as the door opened. Anderson entered, his expression clouded with stress. "Charlotte," he said, startled. "What are you doing in here?" She turned to face him, her eyes locked on his. Her hands shook, but her voice was low and steady. "We need to talk." Anderson hesitated, visibly uneasy. "Yes, we do, but not right now. I've got back-to-back calls." "Important calls," she cut in, a trace of ice in her voice. "And what about my birthday, Anderson? Or did that just not make the list this year?" Guilt flickered across his face, real and immediate. "Charlotte, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to forget. Everything at the firm has been—" She held up a hand, her voice breaking. "Don't. Just don't." There was nothing else to say. "We'll talk tonight." And with that, she brushed past him, her heart bruised, but her resolve intact, now armed with the truth he had tried so hard to bury. What neither of them could have predicted was just how volatile that evening's conversation would be, and how its aftershocks would ripple far beyond the walls of their estate. Night fell over Crestwood Ridge with a strange weight, the kind that hinted at incoming storms, even if the skies were clear. Charlotte spent the entire day locked in a relentless mental tug-of-war. Her heart ached for the marriage she had once believed unshakable, yet her mind screamed for answers. Real answers, no matter how much they might hurt. By the time Anderson stepped through the front door, she was already waiting in the formal living room, seated at the edge of the velvet sofa, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. A single floor lamp bathed the room in warm amber, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. "We talk now," Charlotte said evenly, not even rising to greet him. Anderson sighed heavily as he set his briefcase down and loosened his silk tie. His gaze darted briefly around the room, looking anywhere but at her. But there was no escape. Not tonight. Charlotte stood, walked to the mahogany coffee table, and laid out the documents she had retrieved earlier from his locked drawer. The glossy photographs, the receipts, the handwritten notes in the black leather-bound journal. They were spread across the surface like legal evidence waiting to be submitted for trial. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Anderson's face paled. He stared at the damning images. Him and Aurora at art galleries, upscale restaurants, intimate getaways. He opened his mouth, but no lie could cover this. Not anymore. "Her name is Aurora Pierce," he admitted, voice rough. "We met a few months ago. It wasn't meant to go this far." Charlotte's eyes welled with tears, though she held herself rigidly still. "But it did," she said, trembling, "and you made that choice, over me, over us, over your pregnant wife." Anderson began to pace, dragging a hand through his thick, dark hair. "Charlotte, I'm sorry. I swear I didn't plan it. I felt like something in my life was off. Everything was spiraling." "Missing something?" she repeated, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. "We built a life together, Anderson. I'm carrying your child. and you were missing something." He didn't answer. What could he possibly say that wouldn't make it worse? Silence filled the space between them, dense and suffocating, until finally Charlotte stepped forward. "You need to make a decision." "Tut," she said softly but firmly. "I'm not going to live in a three-person marriage. If you want to be here, truly be here. If you want to be a father and a husband, then you need to cut her out of your life. Entirely." Anderson stared at the floor, the weight of his choices finally pressing down like a vice. He thought of Aurora's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laugh, the sense of reckless liberation she stirred within him. But then he thought of Charlotte. Her quiet strength, her unwavering devotion, and the unborn child she carried, his child. The choice should have been devastating. Yet, in truth, it was clear. Family or fantasy? "I need time," he finally whispered, unable to meet her eyes. "You have until tomorrow," Charlotte replied, not unkindly. "Otherwise, I'll do what I have to, for me and this baby." Anderson nodded, her words cutting deeper than any blade. As he turned toward the staircase, each step toward their bedroom felt heavier, as if weighed by the future he had yet to shape. But fate had plans of its own, far more dramatic than either of them could have predicted. Aurora Pierce had reached her limit. The previous evening had ended in a flurry of tense messages. Anderson's vague promises did little to temper her growing fear. A gnawing question clung to her thoughts. What if he never intended to leave Charlotte? What if every whispered vow was just a tactic to keep her tethered while he lived a lie? In a haze of impulsive defiance, Aurora made her move. Wrapped in a tailored navy trench coat, she stepped into the wet morning air and flagged down a cab. The ride to Crestwood Ridge seemed endless, each mile a slow march toward confrontation. She ignored the string of missed calls from Anderson. Let him worry, she thought. Arriving at the Van Duran estate, she stepped onto the gravel driveway, the crunch beneath her heels sharp and final. The mansion rose before her, imposing and serene, a fortress of wealth and secrets. If Anderson truly meant the things he'd said, this would be the moment to prove it. She approached the front door with resolve and rang the bell, her spine straight, her mind steeled. It was Charlotte who answered. The two women stared at each other, Charlotte visibly pregnant and taken aback, Aurora a vision of poised determination. Charlotte's breath hitched. Recognition struck her like lightning. This was the woman from the photographs. "Aurora Pierce," the woman said, voice cool, managing a brief, stiff smile. "I'm here to see Anderson." Charlotte inhaled, trembling but composed. "He's not home," she replied, blocking the doorway. "Then I'll wait," Aurora said simply, stepping forward with bold resolve. The air in the foyer grew thick. Charlotte clenched her fists at her sides. "You have no right to be here," she said sharply. "You've already done enough damage." Aurora's emerald eyes lit with fury. "Listen, Charlotte. I know this is painful," Aurora said, her tone like stone, "but I'm not the only one responsible. Anderson led me on. He promised me." Charlotte's voice cracked through the hallway, trembling with fury and sorrow. "Promised you what? A future? A life together? And what about my future? Our child's future?" In that moment, the gravity of their entangled lives became heartbreakingly clear. One man's deception had set them both adrift. The confrontation spiraled into a storm of raised voices, bitter accusations, and unbearable truths. And then, Aurora gave a chilling ultimatum. "If Anderson doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows who he really is." Before Charlotte could respond, headlights cut through the darkness outside. Anderson's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out and froze. There, standing mere feet apart, were the two women whose lives he had unraveled, his wife and his mistress. Both confronting the storm he had created. Neither woman said a word as he approached. The wind whipped through the trees, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and the sky over Crestwood Ridge turned a stormy gray. Anderson hurried up the steps, pulse racing. From the moment he saw Aurora's coat and Charlotte's clenched posture, he knew. This was the reckoning. "Aurora," he said breathlessly. Her green eyes darted to Charlotte's swollen belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Charlotte added, her voice a blade of ice. With dread knotting in his chest, Anderson led them into the grand living room, a place meant for cocktail parties and holiday cheer, now converted into a battleground. They stood in a tense triangle. Charlotte near the baby grand piano, Aurora by the marble fireplace, and Anderson caught between two lives, two futures, two versions of himself. He turned to Aurora first. "What are you doing here? You can't just—" "Don't you dare scold me," she snapped, lifting a hand. "You've been dodging me for days. You said we had a future. I deserve answers." Charlotte's voice sliced through next. "So it's true." Her eyes burned. "She's here in our home, demanding what you told her in secret. Did you even once think about what this would do to your child?" Anderson's gaze bounced between them, panicked. "Charlotte, Aurora, this got out of hand. I never meant for it to—" "Stop it." Aurora cut in, fury sharpening her every word. "You chose this. You're not some passive victim. You built this lie." "You promised me a fresh start," Aurora said, her voice brittle with disbelief. "And now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence crushed the air in the room. Charlotte's breath came in uneven gasps, anxiety pressing against her ribs like a vice. She spoke slowly, each word measured, heavy with the weight of finality. "You told me last night you needed time," she said, eyes locked on Anderson's. "Well, time's up. Choose now. Tell her to leave, cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum dropped like a blade between them, sharp and irreversible. Anderson turned to Aurora, whose expression was defiant, but her green eyes shimmered with something raw, hurt, disbelief. She blinked rapidly, as if willing her emotions into submission, but her trembling lips betrayed the storm surging inside. The betrayal was setting in, not just of their affair, but of everything she had told herself it meant. Then he looked at Charlotte. Her eyes were dark, stormy with betrayal. One hand rested protectively on her pregnant belly. Anderson's breath hitched. That image, his wife with the life they created, stood in stark contrast to the chaos he had fueled. A war of memories clashed in his mind. Charlotte's laugh when they found out she was pregnant, Aurora's whispered dreams of Paris. He had hurt them both. In a rush, images stormed his mind, vows exchanged under golden light, nights of whispered promises to Aurora, the unborn child growing inside Charlotte, the consequences of his choices stacked like dominoes, ready to fall. His throat felt like sand. He began, hesitating, swallowing the dread. "I choose Charlotte." The words were final. "This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby." Aurora staggered back as if struck. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice quivering. "You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out." Anderson closed his eyes. "Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done." His voice cracked, not from guilt alone, but from the weight of severing something that, for a time, had felt dangerously real. Tears welled in Aurora's eyes, the raw edges of her illusion unraveling. She looked at Charlotte, eyes seething with betrayal and grief. "You think you've won?" Her voice cracked. "He'll do it again. Men like Anderson never change." With that, she turned and stormed out. The door slammed shut, but the sound didn't bring relief. Charlotte stood still, an unsettling dread tightening around her heart. Aurora's parting words echoed like a curse, lingering in the air. She exhaled shakily, her hand unconsciously tightening around her belly, as if shielding the baby from the toxin of what had just transpired. In the days that followed, Anderson attempted to mend the fragments of their marriage. He accompanied Charlotte to her prenatal appointments, offered gentle touches, whispered apologies, but the chasm between them had deepened. Though she let him back into her space, he could feel the distance in every silent glance and stiff embrace. The staff tried to maintain order, but whispers abounded. The air in the mansion was thick with tension, truths unsaid, and secrets too potent to stay buried. Anderson took a leave from work, letting junior partners manage his empire while he tried to restore his broken home. But Charlotte's suspicion shadowed his every move. A text message, no matter how innocent, would cause her to stiffen, her face haunted by memories of betrayal. Desperate, Anderson blocked Aurora's number, deleted every trace of her from his phone, buried the photographs and notes. But forgetting proved far harder than erasing. In moments of solitude, he still caught himself glancing at the door, half expecting her to walk in again, defiant and wild-eyed. Across town in her condo, Aurora stewed in silence. Anger curled around her like smoke. She replayed every moment, every lie, every promise. Had it all been a game, or had Charlotte's pregnancy boxed Anderson into a decision he didn't truly want? She didn't know, but she refused to believe this was the end. Men like Anderson rarely stayed loyal forever, and women like Aurora, they never forgot. All Aurora needed was a moment, a single mistake, to wedge herself back into Anderson's life, or at the very least, exact revenge for the heartbreak he had caused. On a sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Anderson left weeks ago. His voice, smooth and seductive, poured through the speaker. "You're my shining star, Aurora. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about." She played it over and over again, serenely, tears of rage burning her eyes. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Charlotte's email, easily found through the Van Duran Foundation's public directory. No note, no explanation, just the audio proof of Anderson's betrayal, raw and damning. Let Charlotte interpret it however she pleased. The next morning, Charlotte opened her inbox groggily and nearly dropped the phone. There it was. The message. The voice. Anderson's voice. The very tone he used to once lull her to sleep, now directed at another woman. Sweet, intimate, devastating. She listened in full, then again, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Anger flared inside her like a firestorm. Anderson still lay sleeping beside her, utterly unaware of the detonation awaiting him. For a long moment Charlotte stared at him, this man who had turned her life upside down. She wanted to shake him awake, scream, demand answers. But instead, she slipped out of bed, silent as a shadow, and walked down the hallway into the nursery. The pastel green walls, the soft mobile twirling above the crib, they reminded her of what truly mattered now. Their child. The future, not the lies. Sinking into the rocking chair, phone still in hand, Charlotte exhaled long and slow. She was tired, bone-tired, tired of the guessing games, of pretending, of not knowing the full truth. No more. If Anderson truly ended things, this voicemail was just a desperate last strike from Aurora. But if he was still lying, Charlotte was done giving grace. A plan was already taking shape in her mind. No more shadows, no more waiting. Outside, thunder grumbled across the horizon as another storm rolled through the coast, lightning slicing the sky in jagged streaks. It was as if nature itself mirrored her inner turmoil. Later that day, Charlotte found Anderson in his study, seated behind his massive desk, eyes weary from too many sleepless nights. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice carried no affection, no warmth. Anderson looked up, immediately sensing the shift. He nodded and shut his laptop. "What is it, Char?" Charlotte held up her phone, the voicemail cued. "Aurora forwarded me this, a message from you." His face paled, a flicker of panic racing across his features. "That's old," he said quickly. "Before I made my decision, before I committed to fixing things with you, I swear." "Then why is she sending it now?" Charlotte snapped, her anger barely restrained. "Are you still in contact with her?" Charlotte asked, her voice low but sharp. "No," Anderson replied quickly, firmly. "I told you I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset." Charlotte wanted to believe him, wanted to grasp at hope, but trust had become a fragile, slippery thing in her life. Every word he spoke felt like it passed through a filter of doubt. She searched his eyes, looking for even the slightest twitch that might betray a lie. But all she saw was exhaustion, or guilt, or both. "I'm giving you one chance to prove it," she said, eyes locked on his. "Meet her face to face. Tell her, with me there, that she has no place in our lives. Maybe that's the only way she'll finally stop." Anderson hesitated. He could picture Aurora's face, the heartbreak, the pleading. But Charlotte was right. There would be no true peace unless the door was closed firmly, irrevocably. The thought of seeing Aurora again filled him with unease, not longing, not remorse, but fear of what she might still be capable of. "Fine," he said, exhaling. "But on one condition, you come with me. Let her hear it from both of us." Charlotte felt her pulse race at the thought of confronting the woman who had unraveled her world. But maybe this confrontation would offer closure. Maybe it was the only way forward. "All right," she agreed quietly. "We'll do it together." That evening, the meeting was set at a discreet lounge inside a boutique hotel downtown. Rain hammered the windows, the sky outside smeared with thunderclouds. Inside, the lighting was low, the mood tense. Aurora arrived first, seated in a dim corner, nursing a glass of red wine. Her elegance remained untouched, but there was a sharp edge in her gaze. Charlotte and Anderson entered moments later, shoulder to shoulder, but with a distance between them that spoke volumes. Anderson sat down across from Aurora, Charlotte beside him. His voice was clipped. "Aurora, this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family." Aurora blinked slowly, as if processing a deep bruise. She set down her wineglass with care. "Are you sure, Anderson? After everything we've shared?" Charlotte didn't flinch, her arms crossed, tone hard. "He's sure. We both are." The lounge was nearly empty, the silence between them thick. Aurora took a sharp breath, her composure cracking just slightly. Her fingers fidgeted with the stem of her glass, and a shadow crossed her face, one that flickered between hurt, disbelief, and something far colder. "Fine," she said, "but I didn't come here to beg." She leaned forward, her emerald eyes narrowing. "I came to warn you." Charlotte stiffened. "Warn us about what?" Aurora's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Anderson didn't just whisper sweet nothings. He made promises, business deals. He gave me inside information, in writing. If I chose to, I could ruin him, and your precious Van Duran name with one email." The room seemed to shrink around them, every word falling like a heavy stone. Anderson paled. "Aurora, you wouldn't?" She gave a bitter smile. "Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might get." A flash of lightning lit up the windows, followed by a clap of thunder that shook the crystal chandelier above them. Charlotte stared at the woman across from her. In that moment, the illusion of control evaporated. The chaos was only beginning. The next morning arrived cloaked in a gray fog, and with it, a new and jarring sense of urgency. Charlotte woke early, a tight knot of anxiety winding around her chest. She paced the long corridors of the Van Duran estate, thoughts racing with terrifying clarity. If Aurora decided to go public with her threats, it wouldn't just be Anderson's reputation that crumbled. Their entire legacy could unravel. She imagined the headlines, the whispers, the scrutiny. Their child would be born into chaos, the Van Duran name dragged through scandal. Every gala, every charitable initiative, every news clip where Anderson stood as the image of success and integrity, wiped away by a single revelation. But deeper than image and status, Charlotte feared for Anderson's mental state. For all his bravado, he had built his empire on high-stakes deals and control. If it all came crashing down, would he survive it? Meanwhile, Anderson was in full-blown crisis mode. He paced his study, barking orders into his phone, calling attorneys, business partners, even old political allies, anything to stay ahead of the threat. Yet not once did he meet Charlotte's eyes. The shame of his betrayal and the looming fallout weighed on him like a stone he could no longer carry. Then came the knock. Firm, unforgiving. The butler returned moments later with a sealed envelope addressed to Anderson. Inside were printed documents, evidence of insider trading and dubious real estate dealings, and worst of all, Aurora's name scattered across key contracts and communications. A handwritten note in looping cursive rested on top. "Decide how this ends, A." Anderson sank into a leather armchair, the color draining from his face. "She's not bluffing," he whispered. "I gave her access to the deals. She has everything." Charlotte felt her heart thud painfully. "Why, Anderson? Why would you risk everything?" He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "Because I thought I was invincible. I got caught up in the thrill, the secrecy, the power. I didn't think it would ever catch up with me." Charlotte steadied herself against a wave of dizziness. She clutched her belly, the baby kicking gently inside, as if reminding her that time was running out. "We can't let her blackmail us. We go to the authorities. We face this." But before Anderson could respond, Charlotte gasped, a sharp, unmistakable pain shooting through her abdomen. Her face contorted in agony as her hands flew to her stomach. "My water just broke," she managed to say through clenched teeth. "It's time." All else, Aurora, the threats, the crumbling empire, vanished from Anderson's mind. He leapt to her side, shouting for the driver, lifting her into his arms as fear and urgency overtook him. Within minutes, they were racing toward the hospital. They were racing to the hospital. The tension of the Van Duran estate faded into the background, replaced by a deeper fear, one rooted in uncertainty over Charlotte's health and their baby's safe arrival. Yet as the rain streaked the windows and the city lights blurred past, one thought pulsed relentlessly through Charlotte's mind. Aurora's threat was still out there, like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Not even the miracle of birth could silence the looming chaos. She clung tightly to Anderson's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would mend what was broken, or finally, irreversibly, sever them. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Center felt surreal. Every pothole sent a jolt through Charlotte's core as her contractions intensified, sharp, swift, relentless. Anderson gripped the wheel with white-knuckled urgency, his focus singular. The betrayals, the blackmail, the fragile business empire all faded behind the immediacy of becoming a father. When they arrived, hospital staff rushed to action. A nurse wheeled Charlotte into a private birthing suite, while Anderson stayed close, one hand on her shoulder, the other clutching her overnight bag. The harsh brightness of hospital lights, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the gentle murmur of medical staff created an atmosphere both clinical and electric with anticipation. Monitors picked up the baby's heartbeat, steady and strong. In the middle of their unraveling world, life pulsed with defiant steadiness. Anderson never left Charlotte's side. He wiped the sweat from her brow and whispered reassurances through clenched teeth and guilt-laced breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible over the hum of machines. "I'm sorry for everything." Charlotte met his gaze, searching his face for sincerity. Despite the rawness of her pain, she gave a brief nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. "Let's just get through this," she said through tight breaths. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction was a tidal wave, Charlotte's breathing uneven as she fought to stay focused. Anderson offered her sips of water, whispered encouragement, rubbed her back in the lull between waves. The name Aurora did not pass between them in those hours. The documents, the threats, they all faded to white noise in the singular mission of delivering new life. Finally, the doctor's voice rang clear. "It's time to push." Charlotte gathered her strength, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Thunder rolled outside, lightning dancing on the windows as if the storm outside mirrored the intensity within. Anderson braced her hand in his, pressing his forehead gently to hers, tears streaming down both their cheeks. One final push, then silence shattered by the cry of a newborn. Charlotte collapsed back onto the pillows, her breath ragged. The nurse wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft cotton blanket and gently laid the baby in her arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced with a warm smile. The newborn's cries softened as she nestled into her mother's arms, soothed by the steady rhythm of Charlotte's heartbeat and the tender brush of Anderson's trembling fingers across her cheek. In that moment, Charlotte and Anderson exchanged a look. No words, just a shared understanding. Despite the wreckage of betrayal, lies, and mistrust, they had created something pure, something worth protecting. For the first time in months, a fragile spark of hope flickered in Charlotte's chest, even as the storm outside and within still loomed. For a while the world paused. Friends and family, those who had not yet drifted away in the wake of scandal, sent their congratulations. The hospital staff commented on the baby's strong health. She slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Charlotte's bed, while Anderson sat nearby, watching them both with quiet awe. It was as if, in his daughter's face, he had glimpsed something he hadn't seen in a long time. Redemption. But reality never waited long. On the second day of Charlotte's hospital stay, Anderson stepped out to take a call from his attorney. The voice on the other end was grim. Aurora had sent copies of the incriminating documents to multiple media outlets. They were scheduled to go live unless Anderson agreed to her demands. A large cash payout, enough to guarantee her freedom from consequence, and a public statement that exonerated her while casting doubt on his integrity. The walls pressed in. Anderson could meet her terms, but it would all but confirm the rumors. His liquidity would be drained at a critical juncture, jeopardizing his Charleston development deal. If he resisted, formal charges for insider trading could follow. Either way, he was cornered. When he returned to Charlotte's room, she was holding the baby in her arms, softly humming a lullaby. He paused, heart clenching at the sight of them. For a moment he hesitated, but then guilt pushed him forward. He confessed everything. The blackmail, the documents, the threats. Charlotte's eyes widened in disbelief, followed quickly by cold fury. But when she looked down at her daughter, sleeping so peacefully despite the chaos, something shifted. "We can't let her tear this family apart," she said, her voice low and determined. "You need to fight back. But do it right." Anderson nodded, his voice tight with emotion. I don't know how. Legally, she has the upper hand. Charlotte narrowed her eyes. Then we find something on her. Proof she manipulated you. Something that shows she's not some innocent bystander. A glimmer of hope sparked in Anderson's mind. Aurora had once bragged about bending the rules in her art curation deals. Claims of forged documentation, smuggled pieces, deals inked in shadows. If even one of those stories was true, it was a dangerous road, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Anderson picked up his phone and called Daniel Remington, an old associate from his early real estate ventures. Daniel, a tech-savvy investor with a long memory and a flexible moral compass, owed him a favor. One that Anderson hoped could finally tilt the odds in their favor. Daniel was known for operating in the mist between legal and illicit, always ready to do whatever it took. Anderson hated that he needed someone like that, but the alternative was destroy their future. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a downtown high-rise, like a scene straight out of a spy novel. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, pooling on cracked concrete under the flickering fluorescent lights. "You're really in deep this time, Van Duran," Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar. Anderson exhaled, tension etched in his posture. "I need to protect my family. I screwed up. Help me fix it." Daniel nodded slowly, a crooked smile forming. "I'll do what I can. Start with her info. Phone, email, social media. If there's leverage, I'll find it." Anderson handed over a folded scrap of paper with Aurora's contact details. "Don't push her too hard. I don't want her to snap." Daniel's eyes gleamed. "Understood." Back at the estate, Charlotte sat in the nursery rocking their daughter, Elizabeth Grace Van Duran. The tiny bundle nestled in her arms, each yawn and coo a reminder of everything she was fighting to protect. A life untouched by scandal, full of promise and peace. Anderson paced outside, phone pressed to his ear until Daniel finally called. "I found something," Daniel began. "Aurora's been linked to a private collector overseas, suspicions of forged documents and unpaid artifacts. We've got a direction to threaten her, but I'll need hard proof to push it." Relief washed over Anderson, but it tasted bitter. Still, he replied, "Draft a statement. Frame it like this. If you release anything about me, I'll take steps based on these findings. Let's test the waters." An uneasy truce settled over their home. Days passed without new headlines, blackmail messages, or public leaks. Slowly, Charlotte's focus began to shift from crisis to motherhood. She let herself daydream about a smaller house, a quieter life, maybe even somewhere far from Beacon Hill. One afternoon, Charlotte rocked Elizabeth in the living room while Anderson scrolled anxiously through his email inbox. The dim sunlight filtered through the curtains, but their world still held a tense undercurrent, hope tempered by the knowledge. Real peace would be not a negotiated pause, but a hard-won victory. Suddenly, Anderson's phone buzzed. A message from Aurora flashed across the screen. "You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate." He glanced at Charlotte. She met his gaze and gave a small nod. Silent approval for him to manage the situation, but to proceed with caution. Anderson responded quickly, typing, "We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want?" The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes before Aurora replied, "A sum of money, enough to cover my damages and lost opportunities. Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats." Anderson's jaw clenched as bile rose in his throat. He typed back, "Where and when?" Her reply came swiftly, a trendy cafe downtown, the following afternoon. Anderson's thoughts raced. A public place minimized physical risk, but introduced the danger of witnesses and exposure. Charlotte offered to accompany him, but Anderson refused. "We can't afford to provoke her," he said. "If we escalate this, she could retaliate again." Reluctantly, Charlotte agreed, but not without precautions. With Daniel's help, Anderson would wear a discreet recording device. If Aurora tried to twist the agreement, they would have proof, evidence to protect their family. The next day was drizzly, the sky cloaked in gray. Anderson parked a few blocks from the cafe, carrying a briefcase with a partial payment, just enough to buy Aurora's cooperation. The remainder, he explained, would be wired once she proved she had erased all incriminating data. Daniel waited in a nearby car, ready to alert authorities if anything went wrong. Inside the cafe, Aurora sat at a corner booth, sunglasses on despite the dull light. She waved him over with a faint, unreadable smile. "Busy day?" she asked, sarcasm lacing her voice. Anderson said nothing. He set the briefcase down between them. Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when you provide evidence that every file has been deleted and every statement retracted. Aurora removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were bloodshot, a clear sign of sleepless nights. Do you really think I wanted this, Anderson? I loved you. Guilt briefly flickered in Anderson's expression, but he stood firm. We both made mistakes. But blackmail? That's not love. Aurora inhaled shakily. I just wanted what you promised. Everything else was anger. He slid a flash drive across the table. This contains your dealings with that European collector. Think of it as a reason not to push me again. Her expression darkened. You think this ends it? If you ever breathe a word about my past, I have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other? Anderson gave a slow nod. The tension was suffocating. Aurora reached for the briefcase, unzipped it, and peeked inside. Satisfied with the cash, she rose, straightening her coat. You win, Ethan, but trust me, life doesn't always offer second chances. Whatever's wrong in your marriage, fix it, or you'll find yourself right back here. With that, Aurora brushed past him, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. Outside, the light drizzle had grown into a steady rain. Ethan stood frozen, watching her silhouette dissolve into the gray blur of the city. His emotions were too tangled to name: relief, sadness, and a gnawing premonition. Had he truly closed this chapter, or merely delayed a deeper collapse? Back in Crest Hill Park, Charlotte sat by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Ethan finally returned, soaked from head to toe, she noticed the exhaustion carved into every feature of his face. Without a word, he dropped onto the sofa beside her. The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows on the walls, mirroring the storm that still lingered within them. It's done, he said softly. She's backing off. Charlotte studied his face. And the evidence? She'll destroy it? He nodded, but there was the faintest hesitation. That's what she agreed to. Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice rough with emotion. Charlotte, I know I've hurt you terribly. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try. For Elizabeth, for us, I swear I'm done with the lies. She held his gaze, searching for truth beneath his weariness. After a long silence, she spoke, calm but firm. Then we try, but not like before. We go to therapy, rebuild trust one day at a time. I'm never going back to how things were. Our daughter deserves better. Ethan nodded with conviction. She does. We all do. In the weeks that followed, life assumed a different rhythm. Slower, cautious, but not without flickers of healing. The scandal never went public. The media latched onto other stories, and Ethan's attorneys resolved the legal threats quietly behind closed doors. The Crestwood Heights deal survived, though with reduced margins. Ethan pulled back on his empire building, realizing at last that the illusions and the double life had nearly cost him everything. Charlotte immersed herself in motherhood, growing closer to Elizabeth by the day in the nursery she had lovingly prepared. She picked up poetry again, her words a quiet sanctuary for the grief and growth she'd endured. Slowly, the Hawthorne home changed. No longer a battlefield, but a place where forgiveness had a chance to grow. They reflected often on the lowest moments, the forgotten birthday that began it all, the confrontation at the mansion, the heartbreak that nearly split them forever. And yet, it was through sheer will and the quiet joy of their daughter's laughter that they kept going. A fragile peace hovered over them, delicate, but real. For Charlotte, each sunrise was a new decision. To trust Ethan, to trust herself, to believe in the future they were shaping. For Ethan, every time he kissed Elizabeth's forehead, he remembered the vow he had nearly destroyed, and the family he was still fighting to keep. Let's make this work, Charlotte would whisper, watching their daughter sleep. Yes, Ethan would reply, voice thick with resolve. Let's make it work. And in that quiet agreement, day by day, they chose one another again, held together not by perfection, but by the precious gift of the life they had almost lost. So the story has finally come to an end. And now, our dear friends, you're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with us until this moment, then something about this story must have stirred your heart in a deep, quiet way. And now, together, let's take a moment to reflect, just you and me. This story reminds us that healing is never a straight path. It's full of setbacks, quiet courage, and difficult choices. Charlotte's journey was not just about betrayal. It was about reclaiming her voice, standing tall in uncertainty, and protecting what matters most. As Marcus Aurelius once said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every time Charlotte faced heartbreak, she turned it into a doorway toward clarity. This is the essence of Stoicism, not resisting pain, but allowing it to shape you into someone wiser, more resilient. Anderson's fall and attempted redemption remind us that real change is rarely dramatic. It's found in the mundane, in showing up again and again for the people we love. And sometimes it's not about being perfect. It's about being present. If this story has touched you, even a little, share it with someone who might need it today. Maybe they're walking through their own storm. Maybe they're looking for a quiet voice that says, "You're not alone." And if you believe in stories that heal and hold mirrors to our lives, hit that like button, subscribe, and join this little corner of the internet where we explore not just what happens, but what it means. Because in the end, we all want the same thing. Not a perfect life, but one where we're seen, heard, and loved through the mess. And hey, thank you for staying until now. That already says something beautiful about your heart.